Guitar shifts! Why the fuck are you still here? Unless you're blind, you probably noticed that this video is an hour long. What you're about to see is actually a lesson from 52 Week Guitar Player that I've decided to share for free here on the channel. And it's gonna help you with your improvisational ability a lot. I must say, this is one of the best lessons in the program, and not every lesson is as detailed as this one. So yeah, I just wanted to give you this quick introduction before we jump in. When you realize how much this lesson benefits you and you want to become a part of 52 Week Guitar Player, book a call with my team to discuss joining the program. Link in the description. Also, once we get into the lesson, ignore my mustache. Now without further ado, here you go. Guitar shifts. Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll be covering a lot of sex. Just kidding. We'll actually be covering how to improvise badass solos using harmonic minor, which is basically the same thing. By this point, we've looked at pretty much everything harmonic minor. We've looked at the modes, different chord shapes, how to write chord progressions and solos using it, etc. Assuming you actually followed the practice routines, you should be very comfortable with it at this time. If you didn't, then I'm gonna get pissed off, but I'm not even mad. Now, if you're ready to improvise anywhere on the neck using harmonic minor, let's get started with the lesson. The first thing we'll be doing is a chart analysis. Obviously, we need to improvise over something, right? So we'll analyze the function of each chord in the chart provided, so you know how they all fit together. The backing track for this chart is below the video here, along with another one in E minor. So the one that we're gonna be looking at is in C minor, and then there's another that is in E minor that you're gonna be using in your practice routine. In fact, you'll be using both of these in your practice routine. The next topic that we're going to cover is what we can play over each chord. This is going to take up the majority of the lesson because we're going to break down each possible scale and arpeggio shape for each chord in 5 different positions on the fretboard. The third thing that is going to happen in this lesson is Kaio is going to explain his approach to soloing over the charts. The fourth thing are common improvisational mistakes to avoid. So this is going to be a little bit of a review from Improvisation Firestorm, but this lesson is about improvisation. So we're going to review some mistakes to avoid. Then the last topic of the lesson, we're just going to cover your practice routine. All right? Big fun in the sun. Okay, so let's quickly break down this chart. As we can see, it's a lot shorter than the previous chart that we looked at when we were writing solos in harmonic minor. We can see that it's in the key of C minor, played at a tempo of 85 beats per minute. The first chord we have is our 1 chord, which is C minor, just a simple triad here. We have an F minor 9, so this is our 4 chord in the second bar. Then in the third bar, we have a 2-5 that brings us back to our 1 chord, C minor, all right? So nothing too crazy here, and this section is repeated 3 times. Once you play through this section 3 times, you go on to the next section, and this is also very simple. Okay, so we have a C minor major 7. We have that for 2 bars, which is again, this is our 1 chord. It's a little different than the C minor because here we were just playing a triad. Now we're playing C minor major 7, which is a 4-note chord. But anyway, you play that for the next 2 bars, and then we have a G7 sus. All right, this is a 5 chord. This is the 5 chord of C harmonic minor. And then just to add tension in the very last bar, we make it a G7 flat 9 sus, or a G7 sus flat 9. And that's pretty much the entire chart. All right, so now that we've covered everything, let's actually have a look at what we can play over each chord. This next part of the lesson, we're going to be covering what you can actually play, like what you can actually use to solo over the chords and create something great, okay? The way it's going to work is we're going to break each section of the guitar into 5 different positions, okay? And for each of those positions, we're going to cover what you can play for every single chord. Okay, so what you can play over which specific chord, so you know when to play it, and yeah, all right? So for the first position, we're gonna be looking at frets 2 to 6, and this is gonna be our first position. We might also go to the 7th fret sometimes, but for the most part, we're gonna be in this area. So for the very first chord of the chart, we have a C minor. So what can we play over a C minor chord? Well, we've got a few different options. We could play a C minor 7 arpeggio, shape 5, and it sounds like this. Now, if you don't know what I mean by shape 5, then you need to go back to the Improvisation Firestorm module because I talk about all of these shapes there, okay? This would be in the every minor 7th arpeggio shape lesson. All right, so anyway, you can play that. And now you might be thinking, whoa, Brandon, why are you playing a B flat? Aren't we in C harmonic minor? Shouldn't we have a B natural? Well, you would be correct. But you don't necessarily have to play harmonic minor the entire time, right? Because harmonic minor is a flavor. And while, yes, you do want to focus on it for this lesson since you're learning it, you don't, like, it's not mandatory 100% of the time. And because it's a C minor chord, it's just a triad, our first chord of the chart, you can get away with playing this B flat. Okay, and it also creates a different mood. As opposed to this next arpeggio, which is a C minor major 7. Okay, so this arpeggio is also shape 5, goes like this. So this is where we stretch up to the 7th fret. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You could play it here as well. You don't actually need to put that D in there. That was just me doing that. But anyway, we haven't covered C minor major 7. Well, we haven't covered the quality, the quality of minor major 7 arpeggios. So you want to pay attention to these shapes. They'll be written out as well, but we haven't covered them yet. So we're covering them in this lesson. So just pay attention. They are new. This is new information. But anyway, you can hear that playing a C minor major 7 arpeggio creates a different mood. And well, this A flat isn't part of the arpeggio, but sometimes I get carried away with my noodling. Anyway, so those are the arpeggio shapes that you can play in this position, position 1 over the C minor chord. Now, for scales, we can play 2 different scales. G Phrygian dominant, which is the 5th mode of harmonic minor. And you could also play G Phrygian pentatonic, which goes like this. And those are the scales. For the next chord, we have an F minor 9. So the same scales apply. We can play those over this chord, no problem. They both work. For arpeggios, we'd actually want to play an F minor 7 arpeggio shape 3-1. Now, if you are confused by what I mean when I say 3-1, go back to that lesson in Improvisation Firestorm. The reason that I am calling it that is because it starts on the 3rd. That's where the 3 comes from. And that's the arpeggio. The -1 comes from the fact that we can actually start on the 3rd and play another shape. And we'll get to that when we get to the next position. But for now, you can play G Phrygian dominant, G Phrygian pentatonic, and you can play this F minor 7 over the 2nd chord of the chart, which is F minor 9. Moving on, the next chord is D half diminished, okay? So same scales apply. Now, you can also play an arpeggio, which goes like this. This is shape 5-1. And pay extra attention to this because I haven't talked about this specific half diminished shape before. It goes like this. And again, it's starting on the 5th, which is A flat of the D half diminished chord. And it's -1 because we can play it in another position, but it's fingered differently. We'll get to that when we get to the next position, okay? So the next chord of the progression is a G7, and we can play a G7 arpeggio, shape 1, starting on the root, right? You can also play the G Phrygian dominant scale, which we went over that earlier. Here it is again. But we can't play G Phrygian pentatonic, and the reason for that is because we have a B flat and it clashes with the B. We have got a natural third in a G7, right? So you don't want to play that pentatonic shape. Next chord that we have is C minor major 7. So once again, we already covered the arpeggio that would work for this, which would be a C minor major 7 arpeggio shape 5. And we can also play G Phrygian dominant. So G Phrygian dominant works over every chord in this progression. Now the last chord is a G7 sus. We've never gone over this type of arpeggio before, so check it out. It goes like this. It's a very interesting sound because there's no third in this chord. So we don't have a minor tonality or a major tonality. It creates a very interesting airy sound of chord, and it's definitely an interesting mood. Anyway, like I said, we haven't gone over those arpeggio shapes. So that was shape 1. I'll be showing the rest of the shapes to you throughout this lesson. And you could also play G Phrygian dominant. The last chord is a G7 sus flat 9. Now, there's no difference between the G7 and the G7 sus and the G7 sus flat 9 other than the A flat. So just keep in mind that when you improvise over that chord, you can put in an A flat to give it some more tension. That's going to cover this entire first position. Okay, so let's listen to an example of what it would sound like if I were soloing only in this position. The next position that we're going to cover is obviously the second position, right? So for this position, we're going to be using frets 5 to 9. And we're going to do the exact same process. We're going to walk through every available option for each chord. That way, there's no stone left unturned. So for C minor, we can play a C minor 7 arpeggio, shape 7. So we're starting on B flat, it goes like this. So that should not be new information, but this should be C minor major 7 arpeggio, shape 1. So we've got B naturals. All right, so that would be the arpeggio. For scales, we can play B super Locrian, goes like this. This is the 7th mode of the harmonic minor scale. So that should not be a new shape. You should have experienced that already because we have covered it. And B flat mixo pentatonic would be your other scale. Okay, and that will cover the C minor chord. For the F minor 9 chord, we can play those same scales, and we can also play the F minor 7 arpeggio shape 3-2. So in the last position, we did 3-1. Whoops. Now we can play 3-2. Okay, so that's where the -1 or -2 comes from. We're starting off the same note, which is the third, but there's a variation, okay? It's not fingered the same way. The next chord is the D half diminished, so we could play the arpeggio shape 5-2, okay? So we're starting on the 5th again. And that's it, all right? Now I know when I said position 2 is frets 5 to 9, sometimes we might go to this 4th fret. You know, it's okay to go plus or minus 1 fret. That's all right, but for the most part, we're staying in this area of the fretboard. The next chord would be a, oh, and by the way, that D half diminished, the same scales will work, B super Locrian and B flat mixo. But B flat mixo pentatonic, that's what I meant, B flat mixo pentatonic for the D half diminished. But B flat mixo pentatonic will not work for this G7, okay? B super Locrian will work. G7 arpeggio shape 3-1 will work, goes like this. It's one of my favorite shapes. So you can play that, and you could also play wrong notes. Now for wrong notes, I would actually recommend you take this B flat mixo pentatonic and you slide it up or down 1 semitone, right? So just get creative, like you can come up with some interesting sounds. The next chord is the C minor major 7. So once again, we already covered the arpeggio that will work for that. And as well, you can play B super Locrian. Just to remind you of what the arpeggio was. And to remind you of what B super Locrian was. And the last chord, we have a G7 sus. Okay, so we can play a G7 sus arpeggio shape 4-1, because we're starting on the 4 for this. And this is how the arpeggio goes. Sorry, there's no B flat. Okay, so it's a very interesting tone once again, interesting mood once again because of the lack of a third. All right, and that will cover the entire second position. And now we're going to move on to the third. Actually, before we do, let's check out what that sounds like. For the third position, we're going to be covering frets 7 to 11, all right? So let's do the same thing. We're just going to walk through the process of each chord and what you can play. So for the C minor, we can play a C minor 7 arpeggio, shape 1. We could play a C minor major 7 arpeggio. For scales, we can play C harmonic minor. And we can play C minor pentatonic. That should be very familiar. Now the next arpeggio that we could play, or well actually that covers it, right? So that covers our C minor. Same scales will work. C harmonic minor works for every chord in this position. But for the F minor, the F minor 9, we can play an F minor 7 arpeggio shape 5. Sounds like this. The next chord would be a D half diminished. So we could play the same scales, C minor pentatonic, C harmonic minor, and then we would play D half diminished arpeggio shape 7, which goes like this. Don't do that when you play it. Definitely don't do that. And anyway, the next chord would be our G7 flat 9, okay? So once again, we can play C harmonic minor, we can play wrong notes, and we can play a G7 arpeggio shape 3-2, which goes like this. I really enjoy that shape as well. Okay, now you can also play wrong notes. It's very easy to play wrong notes in this position because you can play the pentatonic scale, that classic pentatonic scale shape, and you can move it up or down a semitone. The trick is to resolve it nicely. That could be a lick there, or maybe you know, something like that. Okay, moving on. Next chord, C minor major 7. So once again, we covered the arpeggio. We covered the scale, C harmonic minor. And that's it. Next and final chord of the position is our G7 sus. Okay, so the arpeggio would go like this. And you can add this D here if you'd like. All right, and let's listen to what that would sound like improvising in this position. Next position, position 4. It's going to span frets 10 to 14. Let's walk through the process, okay? Our first chord, C minor, we could play a C minor arpeggio shape 3-1. We can play a C minor major 7 arpeggio 3-1. For scales, we can play D. We could play a D Locrian sharp 6, which would go like this. Okay? Or we could play E flat major pentatonic. For the next chord, which is an F minor 9, we can play the same scales also in F minor 7 arpeggio shape 7. Goes like this. Next chord would be D half diminished, so we can play the arpeggio of that shape 1. As well as the same scales. And for the G7 flat 9, we can play a G7 arpeggio shape 5. Oftentimes you'll see me adding this A flat in there. It's a good tension note because it's the flat 9, right? You cannot play E flat major pentatonic, but you can play wrong notes, okay? And you can also play the D Locrian sharp 6. The next chord we have is the C minor major 7, and you can play the arpeggio 3-1, which we've already covered. And you can play the scale D Locrian sharp 6. Last chord is the G7 sus arpeggio, and this is shape 5. Okay, so it sounds like. And that's going to cover the 4th position. So let's have a listen to what soloing in that position sounds like. Finally, now we're going to cover the last position, which is the 5th one, frets 11 to 16. Okay, and we're barely going to be in that 16th fret, but you know, just we will be sometimes. Okay, so first chord, C minor, C minor. We can play a C minor 7 arpeggio shape 3-2, goes like this. By now, you should start to be recognizing some of these arpeggio shapes, right? Because we play them in different positions before. We could also play a C minor major 7 arpeggio shape 3-2. For scales, we can play F Dorian sharp 4. So that's the fourth mode of the harmonic minor. And we can also play F Dorian pentatonic. Sometimes I like to throw the blue note in there. Right? So just some, like that's totally cool to do now and then. Now that will cover the first chord. The next chord is the F minor 9. So we can play an F minor 7 arpeggio shape 1. It looks a lot like the pentatonic scale, right? And as well as those scales, the F Dorian sharp 4 and the F Dorian pentatonic. We can play those same scales for the next chord, D half diminished, but let's look at the arpeggio. So it would be shape 3 of the D minor 7 flat 5. Starts on F, goes like this. For the G7 flat 9, we can play the same scales, but you wouldn't want to play the Dorian pentatonic, F Dorian pentatonic, but you could play a G7 arpeggio shape 7. It goes like this. All right, now C minor major 7 arpeggio. We already covered that, so you could, that's for our next chord, which is C minor major 7. And you can play F Dorian sharp 4. Our last chord is the G7 sus, all right? So for that, we could play this arpeggio, which is shape 7 of the G7 chord, because we're starting on F, which is the 7th, and it goes like this. Now I find this one very tricky. This one's a little bit weird on the mind. See, sometimes I want to play that A. It's definitely, yeah, it's certainly the most challenging one. But anyway, that's the arpeggio shape. And of course, you could play the F Dorian sharp 4 as well. Right? Now, I didn't mention this earlier when I was talking about the D Locrian sharp 6. That is the second mode of harmonic minor, right? Sorry. And that's what you can play for each position, all right? So we'll have a listen to soloing in the 5th position now. And that's it, okay? So the reason that we're doing this is because if we're covering the entire fretboard, then there's no stone left unturned, right? You're gonna be able to improvise literally anywhere. Do you want to do that? I ask you, is that an area of interest for you? If it is, then you need to really take some time and go over everything that we've talked about in this lesson. And it's gonna be hard. It's gonna certainly take you more than a week. It will probably take you a month if you're fast, all right? It took me months to really solidify all these arpeggio shapes into my subconscious, right? And the only way to do that is through relentless repetition. So it's going to take you a while to do that. But this is how you improvise anywhere on the fretboard, right? So, you know, if this is something that is interesting to you, like I said, you need to do this stuff, right? you need to take the step from an advanced guitarist to more professional, right? Like, now you may not want to be a professional, but if you can do this stuff, there's not going to be anything that the pros have on you, right? Because a lot of pros can't do this, and I know that for a fact. Anyway, so yeah, that's going to cover this part of the lesson. We're going to move on to the next part now. So, okay.
What's up, guitar chefs? So I'm here to talk a little bit about my approach to the harmonic minor and the way I like to think when I'm improvising over it. So let's get started. So the first backing track, it's the one in C minor. It starts in C minor and then goes to the F minor. And in the F minor, we have a note that's really important, the third, the A flat. And I'm talking about this note because it's not a very good note to put in the C minor chord. So I like to avoid that note when I'm in C minor, and then when it comes to the F minor, I like to emphasize that note. And you'll see me do that a lot in that backing track. So I know this doesn't have a lot to do with the harmonic minor. In fact, it's nothing to do with the harmonic minor, but it's just something that makes sense to me. Okay, with all that being said, there's something that looks like that we can do in the harmonic minor, that when it comes to G7, which is the chord here, one of the chords that we have to use the harmonic minor, we have to emphasize that note, like the note that's important for the harmonic minor. In that case, what is that note? B natural, because it's the major seventh for the C and it's the major third for the G dominant. So, well, at this point, I'm pretty sure you get why. Anyway, that's really important. We emphasize those notes. And again, you'll see me do that a lot in that backing track. Now, there are two main approaches I like to have when it comes to the harmonic minor. The first one is a chromatic one, where I put one extra note in the scale to have this chromatic passage, pretty much like the blue note we like to put in the pentatonic. Well, it actually is exactly the blue note. It's the same note. So you have the minor pentatonic with the blue note here. And we can put the same note when playing the harmonic minor. So it would go like this. So in that case, I actually like to do descending, because that chromatic passage makes that notes of the arpeggio will go to the strong beats in the tempo. So, for example, yeah, I'm pretty sure you heard the chord, you heard that harmonic minor vibe, and I just played the scale, but I play in a way that the notes of the arpeggio are in the strong beat. And fun fact, that's what's called the bebop scale, but like you don't have to worry about this name. It's just the idea of putting chromatic notes in some strategic places in the scale, so you have, you know, notes in the arpeggios in the strong beat, so you can outline the harmony in a better way. But what note it is, right? Well, it's F sharp. So the cool thing here is that we have a G dominant, and we can think about the F sharp as this little note right below the root of the dominant that we can, you know, go back and forth. We can't, it's like the blue note, we can't stop on that note because it can sound bad, like, that's not what we want, but it works as a little charm, you know, and you'll hear that in lots of different songs, in lots of different styles. So it's pretty much that. So that vibe for the dominant, I'm pretty sure you've heard in lots of places, and that's pretty much what's happening here. Now, as for my second approach to the harmonic minor, I think about augmented triads. Yes, this might not be such a common thing, but it sounds great and it's easy to play. Because the thing about augmented triads is that if you repeat the shape 1/3, like one major third above, it'll be the same notes and it'll be also the same shape. It's a very cool thing. So here, this triad actually is G, B, E flat or D sharp, but I rather think E flat in that case. Anyway, G, B, E flat and G again. And here, for example, it's the same shape, but it's B, E flat, G, B. Okay, so those are all the same shapes and the same three notes. It's scattered differently across the fretboard, of course, but the thing here is I like to use it like this, and so this works really well. I like to do this especially in C minor with the major seventh, and it sounds kind of modern. And like I said, it's easy. You can visualize that in different shapes. For example, in that shape here. But you can also visualize in, for example, that shape. So you can pretty much do this, you know, whatever you like. So I really like that sound, and those are pretty much my basic approaches to the harmonic minor in the C minor backing track. So also remember when I said that the B natural is a very important note in the G dominant chord? Yeah, well, one thing you can do is approach it chromatically. So you can reach the B natural by playing A natural and A sharp right before. So that's your target note. And you can just do this. So how would that work? Well, you can do something like this. That's actually a very jazzy thing to do, but it totally works in a more fusion modern approach. And yeah, I like to do that a lot. Now, one last thing I like to do in this backing track is something that happens between the first two chords, because they are C minor and F minor. And, well, if the C were a dominant chord, then we will have to apply the F harmonic minor over there, right? Yeah, well, I like to pretend that it is. Just for a short amount of time. You can't do that throughout the whole chord, because it can seem like you're playing the wrong notes. But if you just do for a brief moment, then you reach the F minor. Well, you're adding a movement that's not originally there. You're building up some more tension to go to the F minor. And in my experience, when you have that kind of chord progression, that usually works really well. It's not at all times that you can just invent, you know, a harmony that's not there. But in this case, in my opinion, it works really well. So what I do is I'm here. And then I just kind of, throughout the solo, I transform this chord into this. Really, for a brief moment, just come here. So it sounds a little bit like this. And this is also a jazzy thing to do, but like I said, for the other parts where I explained, it works really well in this situation, and that's pretty much what I did. So feel free to rewatch my improvisation, paying attention to all of those things that I just mentioned. What's up, guitar chefs? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the other backing track, the one that's in E minor. And when it comes to harmonic minor stuff, I did pretty much all I did in the previous backing track, but I added two new things that are pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about them now. The first one is diminished arpeggios. And diminished arpeggios we can use whenever we have a dominant that requires the harmonic minor, and we can start a diminished arpeggio in the third of that dominant. So in this case, we would have B7, and we can go to the note that's the D sharp, and then we play the diminished arpeggios, and with that we will be playing actually notes from the B7 with the exception of the root. So we will have D sharp, F sharp, A, and C. C doesn't belong to the chord, but it's the minor ninth, and that's actually a good note to put on that chord when it's, you know, a harmonic minor case. So in this case, we can do this. And the cool thing about the diminished arpeggio is that it works pretty much like the augmented triad that I mentioned in the previous video. So you can repeat the same shape and you will be repeating the same notes. In this case here, for the diminished arpeggio, the interval where you can do that is a minor third. So you can do pretty much like this. I was playing the same shape and the same notes. So this is a pretty cool thing. It's easy to visualize and it sounds really cool. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the one I actually like the most, but it's not always that we can do that. But in this backing track we have chords, like we have more chords that require the harmonic minor, and one of them is the G augmented with a major 7. And one pretty cool thing about this chord is that if you remove the root, we will have that. That is B major triad. And because it's a triad, when you apply, like thinking about just the triad, even though those notes are pretty much just part of the chord, it sounds, you know, sophisticated. So if you take a look at my video where I'm improvising, you will see that when it comes to this chord, the G augmented, I play this triad of the B major. If I'm not mistaken, I play here. So you'll be able to see that, and it sounds really, really cool. It sounds modern and, like I said, sophisticated, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So whenever you have an augmented chord with a major 7th, it's a harmonic minor case, but you can also play a major triad starting on the 3rd of that chord. So if your chord is G, G augmented, you can start in the third of that chord and play the major triad. But this will be our root, you know, so we will have that. So, as for harmonic minor, those are the new approaches I had for this backing track. So other than harmonic minor, in this backing track, I pretty much just did arpeggios and pentatonic. And yeah, that's pretty much it. A lot of pentatonic with the E minor, a lot of arpeggios. So whenever you see me doing stuff that sounds a little crazy, like those are pretty much arpeggios, major seventh, minor seventh arpeggios, and that's pretty much it. So that's it, chefs. See you next time.
Next, we're going to review some common fucking mistakes people make when they're improvising. Mistake 1 is playing too staccato. I will never shut up about how important it is to make sure that you have a legato sound in your fingers. I emphasize this mistake a lot because it really used to piss me off. Seriously, I struggled a lot to fix this problem. All right, so. Mistake 2 is staying in one position for too long because it's where you're comfortable. You're never going to be able to improvise using the entire fretboard if you only stick to one position. This is why I've mapped out all of the different positions for you. Now that you know how to solve this problem, if you ever find yourself staying in one position for too long without moving, it's because you're being a lazy bitch. Mistake 3 is not utilizing all the strings. This is a common mistake I see people make when they're just starting out with improvisation. It's similar to the last mistake, but worse, because not only are people that do this uncomfortable with other positions, they're uncomfortable with entire scale and arpeggio shapes. The guitar has more than 3 strings. Use them. Mistake 4 is playing with bad rhythm. I find that this is a very easy mistake for people to make when they don't know what they're playing well enough. So, for example, have you ever been in a situation where you're improvising and you start tripping over what you're playing and your rhythm just starts to go to absolute shit? The solution to this problem is easy. Make sure that you've truly internalized what it is that you're trying to play so you can nail it with confidence. You'll never improvise anything great if you're stuck looking for notes. Now, if you can confidently play everything and your rhythm is still bad, the problem is actually deeper than just trying to find the notes. You need to work on your time. So break out the metronome and start playing arpeggios and scale shapes at different tempos to the click. Mistake number 5 is screwing up the transitions between chords. Most guitarists can sound all right improvising over a chord that lasts a long time, like 2 bars or so. But with faster chord changes, say every 2 beats for example, a lot of people train wreck. To solve this problem, you need to make sure you're nailing the chord transitions. When the chord changes, you outline it. Work on your voice leading. If you need to be refreshed on what voice leading is, then go back to Improvisation Firestorm to freshen up on it. It's important. So to help you with this problem, I've actually provided some 2-5-1 licks to help you out with the chord transitions. I created one lick for each position, and they're in a PDF under this video. Let's hear them now. Now for your practice routine. The first thing I'm going to get you to do is improvise a solo over the backing track that we covered in this lesson. Play to the mood of the track, post it in the group, and get feedback, and then repeat this process 2 more times. Now, when I say the mood of the track, just by listening to this track, you can tell it hits different. And one night, I'm gonna tell you a story. One night I was watching an episode of I Shouldn't Be Alive, which is a really cool show that talks about how people come super close to death, but they survive. Anyway, so in one episode, there were these 3 guys and they were stranded and lost on a deserted island. After 12 days of being there, they got rescued, but just a few hours before, one of the men ended up passing away, and it was pretty heavy. I was also watching this late at night, so, the mood, it was really fitting to this backing track. So after I was done watching, I started improvising over the chord changes, and I was thinking about everything that I just watched, because this track has a darker mood and it fit really well. So just keep that in mind when you improvise over it. The second thing that I'm gonna get you to do, there's another backing track provided with a different set of chord changes. So use the method that we've discussed in this lesson to figure out how to improvise over the track anywhere on the neck. This means that you're gonna have to break down the chart, understand each chord, and once you've done that, you then have to figure out what you can play for each position. Once you've completed that, both of those tasks, I want you to post a video improvising over it in the group, get feedback, and repeat this process 2 more times. So for your third posts for each of these solos, this is the third thing in your practice routine here, I want you to record a nice video and use your DAW if you have one. Make sure the lighting is nice and present yourself professionally for your third solos. But Brandon, when can I move on? This practice routine has a clearly defined end, so it should be pretty fucking obvious, mate. Brandon, why am I doing this? What a stupid question. The reason that you're doing this is so you can improvise anywhere on the neck using harmonic minor. This process is probably going to take you some time, but the more you do it, the faster you'll become at it. Pretty soon, it won't take you much time at all. Just remember that when you're sitting with your guitar and you're thinking, this is kind of hard. Don't be a pussy bitch. Get it done. Yeah! Wait a minute. Who the fuck is that guy? This will conclude the lesson. Now just leave, okay? I don't want you here.